Hello and welcome to episode 2 of A Pint of Politics and a Pack of Bacon Fries.
Pint of Politics.
Pint of Politics, yeah. How are you, Jordan?
Good, thanks. How are you, Evan?
I'm not too bad. If you're just tuning into this episode, I'd recommend you go back to episode 1 to see an idea of who we are and what we're talking about. It was a good episode, I think.
Yeah, it was fun.
We got some decent feedback overall, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was maybe 80%, 20% good to bad.
Yeah, there wasn't much bad. People didn't like the name.
Yeah, a few people had a problem with the packet of bacon fries addition to the name, which...
But I think that's what we thought all along. It was always sort of going to be Pint of Politics mainly, and then that was just a second...
A kind of an addition. I suppose it's a sort of an analogy kind of for what the show we're given. So the show we're doing is, in a way, it's sort of talking about topics that people don't really like talking about, maybe to a certain extent.
Yeah, definitely.
And I have always found if I'm ordering a pint in a bar and I want to get a packet of bacon fries as well, it can be awkward enough. You'll say to the barman, can I get a pint of Hop House, and you'll start walking away and you're like, oh, and a packet of bacon fries.
Yeah, but anyway, welcome back.
Thanks very much. How was your week?
Good, busy, really busy. How was yours?
Yeah, it was pretty busy too. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Yeah, me too. I actually really been excited about it. Fortunately, it hasn't been as exciting news wise. Well, they're not as... The volume wasn't as...
No, the volume is definitely down this week. We went, I suppose we did an hour and a half show last week.
Took pretty much all our content for the next month of podcasts and did it in one show.
Yeah, pretty much. But I suppose that's how news works, isn't it? Like news changes every week, so it's about, I suppose, predicting what the news is going to be like. And it's been a quiet week in comparison to last week.
Maybe just a relatively normal week any other time of the year.
So let's have a look at what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to be having a look at what brought 10,000 people to march on Ireland's capital yesterday. I have written down Dublin's capital yesterday, which is, that really nearly caught me off guard. Our bizarre story of the week is how horses are causing problems in the meat industry yet again. And our Lost in the Storm section, we're going to be looking at Ireland's obsession with Palestinian solidarity and how have the HSE accepted that medical cannabis can be used to treat epilepsy.
Exciting show ahead.
There's some good stories in there.
A little shorter than last week.
Hopefully.
Yeah. We're going to try and stick to our aim of 45 minutes.
45 to an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's not make people too optimistic.
So we kick in anyway and...
Yeah, let's kick it off. We'll look at what brought 10,000 people to march on Dublin's capital yesterday.
Ooh.
What brought 10,000 people to march on Dublin's capital yesterday?
Homelessness. And it's... the ongoing issue for the last few months, almost the last few years now in media, but do you want to start telling us what's currently happening in society in regards to this? Yeah,
so I mean, as you said there, you couldn't have said it better. It's been an ongoing issue in society for the past year, I suppose. I mean, it's
at least.
Look, homelessness is always going to be an issue in society, but it's really starting to kick off over the last year. I think what's really made it so controversial is the fact that we're supposedly in this time of economic boom. The economy's doing really well.
Well, recovering, yeah. Back where
one of the fastest growing in Europe, supposedly, but yet we've hit a record amount of homeless people in Ireland at 10,000 people. 3,000 to 4,000 which are children. So that's created a big problem, obviously, in Irish society. And speaking on the number of 10,000 people turned out in Dublin yesterday to demonstrate over the issue that they feel that a lot of people feel the government aren't tackling the issue with as much severity as it should be tackled with. So yesterday we had obviously 10,000 people in Dublin marching on the issue. Usual suspects in terms of political figures. You had Mary Lou McDonald, Sinn Féin, Richard Boyd Barrett, who's Solidarity TD. You had a number of homeless charity representatives there as well. Some of the demands, I suppose that's what's kind of bringing us into this story, is the demands that are sort of being challenged or put towards the government, including declaring homelessness as a national emergency, outlawing evictions, and I suppose the big one that we're going to talk about is the demand to making housing a constitutional right. So look, I mean, it was obviously a great turnout, especially given the weather conditions yesterday. They were bad. I was in town yesterday. The weather was brutal in town. But yeah,
look, it's an extremely serious issue, and if you can get 10,000 people out on a day like that, there's obviously something going wrong, for sure.
So let's have a look at this whole idea of making housing a constitutional. Well, let's go back a little bit. Why is, despite the fact the economy is doing so well, why do we have a homelessness crisis?
Well, I guess that's everybody's question at the moment. I think it boils down to the fact it's not a simple maths problem. A good economy doesn't necessarily mean that wealth is trickled down to every single individual member of society. It doesn't mean that everybody will have a house, that everybody has a place to sleep. What we're seeing is almost like throughout the world, this whole class divide is being highlighted, and I think even more so with this recovery, what we're seeing is the members at the top of society are pulling the economy back into shape, and it's the aim of that is to trickle down the wealth. Now, obviously, it's not as simple as that, and maybe everybody will have a different solution as to why this, or how to solve it, or why it's occurring, but it's there. We know it's there, our statistics show it's there, and I think a lot of it is to do with our attitude as a society. A lot of people probably disagree, but in a way we have ignored the problem for quite a long time. We've been very focused on the likes of planning permission legislation, building heights, things like this, that aren't going to solve the problems completely by themselves, but it's almost a self-centered approach which has caused this issue. Like, everybody wants a nice back garden, everybody wants a bit of land in a very...
It's a very Irish thing.
It's a very Irish thing, yeah, you know. I know it's a running joke that you go to a nightclub, like, what land do they have? But like...
Yeah, a bit of road frontage.
Yeah, stop. But
so is it a case where we've almost, as a culture, become so obsessed with one ideal, and we've almost forgotten about people who, you know, they don't even have the choice of having an ideal. They just need somewhere to live.
Yeah, like I remember I went to India years ago for a TY charity trip, and it was a very short trip, but one thing that highlighted to me was how small spaces people can live in. It's something that we're completely oblivious over here, I think. Like, I look at my back garden and I think, oh, I have a tiny back garden, but then I realised that a whole other house could be built here. Like, a building that here would maybe only fit 4 people, in India would fit 50, and well, that's not the ideal, obviously. What I mean is that there's a huge difference between being homeless and having a home, and a roof over your head
doesn't necessarily constitute as a sort of an ideal living scenario.
No, it doesn't, but at the same time it just shows that with this excess space we do have in Ireland, that we could very easily put a roof over somebody's head in terms of space alone.
And is it a problem that everyone wants to live in Dublin, but there's not enough room in Dublin?
Yeah, I think this is a sort of two-sided argument. Some people will say that our urban sprawl is pretty poor. Like Ireland's average population per square kilometre is 70 people. So 70 people live on average in each square kilometre. Now, if you look at rural Ireland, that's 20. It goes down to 27 people per square kilometre, and that's that can kind of be accounted for based on our huge agricultural industry, and like obviously there's going to be a lot of farmland with just one farmhouse on it, and so that may distort the figures a little bit, and obviously that is a good use of space, having that agriculture. But then you go to the likes of inner Dublin city centre, where you have 3,677 people per square kilometre. Now, that sounds like a huge difference, but it's still not a completely effective use of Dublin city and Dublin as a county's land, to be honest with you. Like, if you compare those density levels to other European countries, you're looking at Copenhagen, which has 6,800 per square kilometre, Amsterdam, which have 4,439 per square kilometre, to be really exact. But it's just which are all significantly higher than Dublin. So there's definitely still room in Dublin for more people to live there, and if you're to compare it, but Dublin is relatively small, and under current legislation and current height limits, and just current attitudes, like, I don't think many people are willing to give up their back garden. Like, even me, like, a horrible sort of irony, it's a hard thing to do, to say, oh, can we all sacrifice our front gardens to double the housing availability in Dublin. Like, look at what's happening in Raheny at the moment in St. Anne's Park. There's a big issue over giving up that area for housing.
I suppose because people are reluctant to, I suppose there's talk of playing fields and walking areas and just sort of public communal areas being taken up by, I'm pretty sure it's private development, but nonetheless it's still houses.
Yeah. It's this idea of what's the most effective use of our resources. Sometimes looking at having a football pitch might be the best use of our resources. It might keep our children active. It might encourage the growth of sports in areas. It might keep people out of trouble, etc. But then the opportune cost of that is missing out on housing areas, and that is what this all comes down to, basically.
Is there a reluctance, do you think, for people, not homeless people of course, but for people who maybe work in Dublin, is there this attitude that people feel that they have to live near work?
Yeah, definitely. You look at...
I don't know why I'm asking that question, because I fundamentally have that reluctance as well.
I think everybody does. It's a really Irish tradition. Definitely, that I've seen compared to other countries. Like, the thought of living outside Dublin and working in Dublin is...
Oh, it's alien.
It's alien. And like, you look at even housing, obviously housing and rent prices in Dublin are soaring because of that mass movement to get closer to the city centre. House prices along the motorways coming out of Dublin in the GDA area, they're always higher because of this attitude of living as close to Dublin as possible. Like, you can get houses in the middle of nowhere for 50-60 grand, and people don't want to do it because it's a 2-3 hour commute to Dublin. Now to us that seems absolutely mind-blowing. But if you go, like, I have a lot of American friends who I talk to and say that that's nothing, that a 2-3 hour commute, you're living in the city if that's the commute you're doing. Now, like, look, I'm gonna, like, as you said, I can't put up, like, I'm just as at fault as much as everybody else here. I don't want to be living in the middle of nowhere, even if it does cost 50 grand when you can live
back to Navan.
Yeah, back to Navan. Navan wasn't too bad in terms of getting into Dublin, but yeah, like, it's a hard one. Nobody wants to be the person to move out. But as I was saying earlier, I definitely think there's more room in Dublin for people. So while we're trying to encourage people to spread further out, there's certainly more room, and I know the government are trying to address that by I guess working on the supply side of the supply demand curve. Obviously they can't work too much on the demand side. We know that there's an excess demand. They need to tackle the supply side, so by increasing both privately provided accommodation and socially provided accommodation. One of the ways of doing that has been looking at relaxing planning permission laws, so the height restrictions. A lot of people say that there's this that by hiring Dublin has an extremely low skyline compared to the rest of Europe, and that's due to a very strict height limits in Dublin. Now, a lot of people say that by removing that or by upgrading it, there'll be an increase in an apartment building, and so more people can get into a smaller space and live in a smaller space, and so we'll be able to effectively and efficiently use our resources to maximize our housing. Is that the ideal solution? Certainly to an extent. Will it work? I'm not too sure. We don't like apartments, and that's one of the biggest surprises that came out of this, that even relaxing these things a little bit, that there wasn't this huge demand for apartments, and we're actually still trying to move away from it on one hand. You look at the likes of Ballymun, where they're trying to lower the skyline and lower the amount of high-rise apartments. It's almost a contrast of ideas, but there are other ways of looking at the supply side. Obviously increase social housing, increasing funding. In 2017 there was an estimated
there was a figure put on housing, wasn't there?
Yeah, so in 2017 there was about 1.1 billion allocated towards housing. In 2018 they have severely increased that to 1.3 billion, over 1.3 billion. Now, that is the second biggest percentage increase. You'll never guess who the highest percentage increase is.
I have an idea, but tell me anyway.
It's communications. They got a 19%. Well, communications, climate, and I can't remember the other area that's roped into that. But yeah, they got a nice 19% increase. So you can thank the Strategic Communications Unit for that.
In regards to making housing a constitutional right, is that something that's feasible, or are you just going to run into more problems than
I believe you're going to run into more problems there. It's a good intentioned idea, a really good intentioned idea, and it is something that seems like it makes a lot of sense. Everybody should be we shouldn't have homelessness, and yeah, it should be something that should be embedded in society, that we don't accept homelessness, and that is something that we should definitely move towards. But by embedding it in the constitution, I feel it creates a lot of problems. I think it wouldn't tackle homelessness in the way that we're trying. You would have the likes of people hitting 18 years old and moving out of their family home, entitled to a house.
I suppose it depends on what the details are. I mean, if you've the right to a house, but you can't afford to maintain that, it'll just come to a stage where pretty much everybody is just going to be living in a house that they haven't paid for.
Yeah.
So who pays for that houses? So who pays for those houses?
Yeah, that's another big issue. There'd obviously be a reluctance to create any loans to, I think the idea that they're going with is that the government completely takes over the housing market and provides public housing to everybody. But I don't feel like that matches the demand that people are looking for.
Okay.
Obviously it depends, if you embedded that in the constitution, it depends on who is looking for the housing. I think there needs to be a focus on, it's kind of the old saying of, give a man a fish and he can feed himself for a day, teach him how to fish and he can feed himself for life. We need to set up a situation where we incorporate the homelessness community back into society, because they've been excluded. You can't get a job if you don't have an address. You can barely clean the dole if you don't have it. Like, it's a very tough situation to bounce back from. I think that's what people don't realise, is just how deep of a hole it is, how hard it is. Like, look, I don't have any personal experience, thank God, of it, but I think one thing that needs to be accepted is that we need to reincorporate these people into society and provide them with the ability to pay for their housing, as opposed to
make it harder for them to get out of the situation that they're in.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of what it is now, as you said there. You can't get a job if you don't have an address. You can't get social welfare if you don't have an address. So I suppose it's about, excuse the pun, addressing that issue. That will resolve.
Definitely. Like, even the likes of having like, there are a lot of initiatives out there, and I feel I don't want to be undermining a lot of the very good initiatives that are out there that do help people, but there needs to be more done in terms of addressing how people can get back on this ladder, on this social ladder. I think there's a combination of making Dublin a more dense city, allowing for a better, more effective use of our land, our resources. So, like, we could almost, on paper, double the amount of people living per square kilometre in our city and still remain relatively average on the European side of things, but also allow people to provide them with the services to be able to support themselves. It's like, it goes down to the whole idea of welfare and how it should be provided, and I think by embedding it in the constitution, and this is just my legal side coming through, you're opening yourself up to so many problems, a complete abuse of the system. People will be having larger families on the idea that their 10 children are each entitled to a house themselves, and you're going to end up with this. Every single individual in Ireland has their own house, and that's not an ideal situation either.
It's an interesting one. Owen Murphy, Minister of Housing, is yet to comment on the demonstration in Dublin yesterday, so it'll be interesting to see what develops there. Yeah. Let's have a look at our bizarre story of the week, because that one that we talked about there was a heavy one. That's another thing as well, for listeners, in terms of feedback. If there's a different order that you think works better,
actually, it's one thing that a lot of people didn't comment on, and it's something we're always quite unsure about, whether to jump into the heavy. I suppose we like to break it up. We like to start off with maybe a heavy story, then look at something that's maybe a bit more light-hearted. I don't know if you take this next one as light-hearted or not, but we found it light-hearted. And then kind of move on to maybe back into the heavier sort of stuff, just to break it up, make it easier to listen to. But anyway, our bizarre story this week, what is it? You're gonna love it. It is horse meat.
The infamous horse meat. We're back in 2013 again.
Yeah,
we're still in a recession.
Back. Why is horse meat back in the newspapers?
So the Department of Agriculture and the Food Safety Authority of Ireland are investigating reports that false documentation was used to export bad horse meat through Ireland into mainland Europe. Apparently, I didn't know this, I don't know if you knew this, we're one of, well, I don't know if we're one of the largest, but supposedly we're a significantly large exporter of horse meat into Europe.
Yeah.
Last year we had 7,749 horses go through Ireland into the food chain through Irish abattoirs.
The funny thing is, like the bit of research I did on this before, I discovered that this is a downsized market. So this market was almost 3 times as big before the original scandal.
In 2013?
In 2013, Ireland was a huge player in that sense. It was one of the fastest growing niche markets in Europe. It was considered, like, it's very popular in French culture and European culture, it's very tasty. Apparently,
Speak from experience, or did you read that in a book?
A bit of both, to be honest with you.
But that's just that just goes to point out how crazy it is that we're such a large exporter of horse meat, but yet you won't walk into an Irish restaurant and order horse. It's just not a thing here.
No, it's not at all. And you made the point earlier, when we originally saw these figures and we saw how big of an industry it could potentially be for Ireland and how big of a market it is in Europe, we couldn't get over how you don't see any horse farms essentially.
Yeah, and it seems to be because for some reason we generally import a lot of the horses into Irish abattoirs and then export the meat.
Yeah, and so basically I looked into this process because I was trying to find out exactly what the issue was here and how it differed from the 2013 scandal, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But basically how the process goes is after the meat industry scandal in 2013, Europe looked to address the issue and make sure that this never happened again. So they introduced new regulations in 2016 where every horse has to have a passport. And the onus is on the keeper, not necessarily the owner of the horse, to ensure that every horse has a passport. So they get this chip inside of their neck, kind of like the way you chip your dog to make sure that they don't get lost or whatever. They get the chip in the side of their neck.
And that checks out with the passport.
That checks out with the passport. They have to agree. That chip sort of monitors the horse. It feeds back to a database. It gives them all sort of information and what kind of medicines the horse has had, the breed of the horse, so much information. It's all this data center, but it has to match the passport, and this is where this issue has come up. So from what I could see, it's a regular occurrence that maybe 30 to 40 every year are excluded from entering the food chain because of the mismatch of the passport and the data. And that's one of the criteria. If that passport doesn't match the data, that horse is not eligible for human consumption. But this is kind of the opposite way, because these horses have gotten through essentially, from my understanding, and it's realised that it wasn't necessarily a mistake of documentation.
Yeah, no, it seems to be very much a case of fraud, really. So, forged documents originating supposedly from Eastern European countries, declaring the horses weren't ever treated with a certain type of medicine. So the medicine is called Appleboot, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce it. It's an anti-inflammatory for horses, but supposedly it's incredibly dangerous for humans to consume horse meat when that horse has consumed that medicine. And the issue is that a certain amount of horses have supposedly entered the food chain in mainland Europe through Ireland that have had false documentation, and
to hide the fact that they've had these medicines, because if they've had certain medicines they can actually have once they don't enter the food chain straight away. And so once that is all stated and clarified by their data and their passport, that's no problem. But it's the fact that these were intentionally hidden and somehow managed to get through.
It's not a good look. I suppose in terms of the impact in Ireland, we're not really at risk of consuming any of it because we just don't eat horse meat here.
Yeah, it's
but I suppose it just came to me there. I didn't even think about it before, but it could potentially be quite bad for supposedly we're one of the big heads in horse meat exports. It could potentially damage that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's a growing market. It's grown by about 1,000. So I think you said the figure of 7,800 horses were slaughtered last year. The year before it was just under 7,000. It was about 6,900 and about 1,000 less the year before. So it's a growing market, and it's definitely something that Ireland would be targeting in the meat industry. Look, it's a huge difference to the big scandal in 2013. It's nothing like, it hasn't been mixed secretly with burgers.
You're not going to find it in your lasagna.
You're not no. But what it is that if you are in mainland Europe and you're consuming you want to buy your horse steak this week, you might want to double check.
Where it came from.
Source.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bizarre one.
It is a bizarre one. It could have been a bigger story as well, but it really stood out as a bizarre story. The fact that horse meat was back in the media after, it was like the comeback.
Exactly, yeah.
Horse meat's 2018 comeback.
Yeah. There's a lot of jokes I can make with the Grand National and Ruby Watch, but I'm not going to do that. So,
which brings us to our next category, I guess.
Our next section.
We park that there for now anyway, and we move on to our next section. Lost in the Storm.
Yeah, so just to recap, this is stories that we picked up during the week that may have been lost in the storm, so to speak, for if there were bigger stories going on, that these didn't really get that much attention. We kind of feel that they're worth talking about.
Definitely. And you have a really interesting one this week. One that I really had no idea about, and I still have no idea about, so this is really just going to be me asking you everything about this. You're probably going to just be explaining this all to me. So what is your Lost in the Storm this
so
week?
it's about, so yesterday there was a demonstration organised outside the Israeli embassy in Dublin.
Okay.
By an Irish Palestinian solidarity movement on Facebook. So I caught wind of it on Wednesday, and it kind of grabbed my attention because I did a bit of so I do a bit of freelancing on the weekends as a sort of a side hobby, going to events in Dublin, writing about them, taking a few pictures, which I'll attach to this podcast as well. Only 2 episodes in, I'm already shilling my own stuff. So I went along anyway, and it was strange, and I'll tell you why. So the background to why the demonstration was organised, so the last couple of weeks there's been a lot of death, I suppose, to put it bluntly, in Gaza. So look, I don't really have opinion. I'm never really one to take a side in the whole Israel versus Palestine debate. I don't know enough about it. I've never been to either country, so I'm not one to go picking sides. But over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of protesting going on by people in Gaza on the border with Israel, and I think the figures now are there are over 30 in the last 2 weeks who've been killed by Israeli military on the border. Yeah, there's been a lot of criticism over media saying they've been killed during clashes and during violent there's been a lot of indication that violence come from both sides. Again, I'm not there, I'm not one to say, but to go back to the original point, the reason that the demonstration was called in Dublin was because it's also actually triggered by the Russian diplomats being expelled, or the Russian diplomat being expelled by Ireland over the whole Salisbury poisoning scandal. So there's been a big call from a lot of Palestinian and Irish solidarity movements in Ireland for the Irish government to expel Israeli diplomats. So I went along with the protest. On Facebook there was about 360 said that they were going on Facebook, and another over 1,000 said they were interested. So I was kind of expecting a big crowd, and I tell you why, because I was at another similar demonstration outside the US Embassy back in December when Donald Trump said that they were going to, the United States were going to be recognising Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So that caused a bit of a stir in the community, and there was about 300, maybe 400 people at that. But there was no violence, there was no tension, anything like that. It was very, very much a very peaceful, relaxed protest. There was a sizable enough Garda presence, but nothing spectacular, maybe 10, 20 Gardaí. Yesterday, as I said, I was expecting tension, I won't lie, because obviously you're looking at a situation where people are getting killed, and
yeah,
it's a sensitive topic. So I was really expecting there to be a bit of tension, and I think the Gardaí were as well, because when I arrived there were, I'd say, about 3 or 4 vans full of the public order unit of the Gardaí, who were effectively riot police, on standby in the grounds of the embassy, as well as a few normal uniform, the old high-vis beat patrol lads around the area. I'd say there's probably about maybe 40 police there overall, visible. There really wasn't a big turnout.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I was really surprised. I'd say there were maybe at most 100 people there at any given time. And the other thing I found really amazing was that everybody seemed to be of a kind of a white Irish ethnicity, which is great to see. Obviously, you know, it's not just Palestinians in Ireland who are protesting against the Israelis, it's Irish people who are getting involved, which is always great to see, regardless of what side you're on in any debate. It's great to see that solidarity. But in contrast to the protest I was at in December, the vast majority of people were maybe not Palestinian, but they were of an Arabic ethnicity. So that was very surprising, and I spoke to a few people as to why they thought the crowd wasn't great, and you know, a few people kind of speculated that because, so this was on the same time as that homelessness demonstration up on O'Connell Street, which obviously got all the media attention and political attention. So a few people speculated maybe that's why the crowds weren't there. Others said, you know, it was a miserable day, but obviously it didn't stop the people going to the homelessness thing. But there was another good reason I heard from a couple of people there yesterday. Basically, there are loads of different groups who are set up, official and unofficial groups, for Palestinian and Irish solidarity. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be one, and this is from what I was told yesterday, there doesn't seem to be one body who are sort of leading that movement. And what happens then is that you have a load of different groups standing for the same thing, but they don't really talk to each other, not out of malice or anything like that, they're just not organised to talk to each other. And you get situations where one group will show up, but the other groups won't even know what's happening. And I think maybe, if you ask me, I think that's the most reasonable reason for what happened yesterday, why there really wasn't the groups. It was disappointing to see. Again, I don't like taking sides in that debate because I don't know enough about it, but I don't think, like, a crowd of 100 people outside the Israeli embassy, that's really not going to motivate the government to act.
Yeah, especially when you have 10,000 people on your doorstep
giving out about homelessness.
Yeah, you kind of are going to prioritise something more than other, and I guess that's why this has really been lost in the storm, not only by mainstream media, but by the sounds of it, the likes of Facebook and
the likes of the actual groups who are there to be progressive on this issue. It looks like they don't even know about it.
Yeah, and maybe that's like, look, I'm completely oblivious to all this, unfortunately, and I wouldn't be able to tell you much about it, but it seems like there definitely needs to be some communication there, and basically maybe just looking out and trying to talk between the groups and organise some sort of official movement between them, because there's, from the sounds of it, from you talking about the earlier protests, there's definitely that anger and
there's definitely an attitude,
disappointment with the government's current position, and it
roots back to, I suppose, the troubles in Northern Ireland and that war, to put it bluntly, because there would have been a lot of, it kind of kicked off when, I think, because obviously Palestine versus Israel was going on at the same time as Ireland versus England in Northern Ireland. The Irish took very much a solidarity position with the Palestinians, and the British took a very solidarity position with the Israelis, and I think that's just trickled down now into modern society. And I think there's no, as you said, or as we both said, there's no
cohesive movement.
There's no cohesive movement for it, and I think that's what's really making this whole situation plateau.
Yeah, and so many factors come down to it on the day as well.
Big time.
In terms of other things that are on the day, can have a huge effect on it. The weather, like as you said.
The other demonstration. But it didn't really, the other demonstration didn't really explain why there weren't people from an Arabic ethnicity there. Anyway, I'm sure if anybody's listening who knows more about it than we do,
please, this is something that I'd be really interested in hearing from, and like, I know we would have a lot of friends that would be very passionate in this area. Please talk to us and, I guess, educate us as much as you can on this.
Why? Like, where were people yesterday? Did they know about it and choose not to go?
Yeah, what is happening? Is there bigger movements down the line? Is, like, it's something that I'd love to hear about. Not in it's something that I feel that I'm too ignorant about, almost, that I should know more about, because it is so sensitive and it is such a serious issue. And I'll hold my hands up and say that that's a fault of mine, but I'd be really interested in hearing from anybody if they wanted to have a discussion with us and talk to us about this. So
let's have a look at your loss in the storm, and that's regarding HSE and cannabis. Yeah,
so revolves around the almost famous now, Ava Twomey.
Young girl from Cork, I believe.
Yeah, and she suffers from Dravet syndrome.
Is it Dravet or Dravet? I don't know, actually.
Yeah, again, my ignorance is killing me here on this. This podcast can just be called Jordan's Ignorance, to be honest with you. But it's
I don't know either. So.
Look, I'm trying. It's a form of epilepsy, and it's to do with how they're treating it. And for a long time, her parents were very vocal about the HSE's unwillingness to provide or to subsidise cannabis use to help with the side effects of epilepsy, essentially. And this is one of the things that a lot of epilepsies, a lot of epilepsy websites and news centres try to vocalise that it's not a medicine, that it is to treat the side effects, the pain and the issues that it can cause. And what they've basically done is they essentially went to, there was crowdfunding, and people tried to offer the Toomey family money to fund the treatment. But they made a very good point, and they said, we don't want to take this money because what it is doing then is it's avoiding the solution of a system. And I thought this was a very fair point. So what they were saying was that while we understand our daughter needs this terribly, or that it will help her a lot, we don't want to accept outside sources of funding because they'll become the status quo, and the government will be able to avoid it and be able to move away from funding this. But basically they went across, and it was costing about 4,000 to 5,000 euro a month to undergo the treatment, and they've turned around and they've finally decided that this should be funded or subsidised by the government. So they've provided some funding for the treatment to help fund it. Like, the reason I think this is a lost in the storm issue is, in one way, it is the end of a story that has been playing out for at least the last year. A lot of people were very familiar for it, and then it seemed to me that it just disappeared from the radar. When so many things happened in the last year that it just disappeared in a way, but the issue was still there. But in behind all this wave of media attention, the government have shifted towards allowing medical marijuana to be provided to people that genuinely feel in need of this, or that will generally acquire it. Like the first provision. So my understanding how it works at the moment is that you apply for a permit to be allowed to use it. On an individual case, you either are accepted and rejected, and the first one for chronic pain was accepted in November 2017. There's bills in the Oireachtas that are being pushed, and it just seems that there is this movement very slowly, very painfully probably for the people involved, towards it becoming available completely, I guess, on the medical side.
I suppose it's important to clarify as well exactly what the treatment is. So it's not like, Ava's sitting around Cork smoking joints all day. That's not the case at all. This is from epilepsy.com, which is sort of a fundraiser and awareness raiser for different forms of epilepsy. And under this particular type of epilepsy, one of the recommended treatments is CBD, which stands for, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, cannabidiol?
And it's part of the one of the chemicals that's in
the plant itself.
In the plant, it's called, and this is going to be an even harder and even worse pronunciation, tetrahydrocannabidiol, something along those lines, THC.
Yeah.
So it is the treatment using that.
It'll be interesting to see I suppose like you could kind of say it's surprising it's not a bigger story, to be honest with you.
No,
I would have
especially-
expected, because it's a sort of it's a good, the HSE have done something good here, and like you kind of have to respect what they've done here.
Yeah, you'd think the strategic communications unit would have been putting in an editorial on this or something.
But maybe there's a risk then that by doing this, they're accepting that this is an effective form of treatment.
Yeah, it does.
And does that then become an epidemic? Then are they going to have to? So is anything that has research showing that it can be treated with CBD? Does that mean
or anything in general?
Yeah.
Look, I think there's always going to be cases where somebody will have a serious disease and some absolute obscure drug will help alleviate the symptoms. Here there's growing research, it's still very early, that it does help the symptoms. The high of it helps deal with a lot of the symptoms of many diseases, including this. It does seem like they're taking a very stand back, once off approach that will almost a trial run. Whether it'll hit mainstream where a doctor could prescribe it, I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see.
It'll be an interesting to see one, but it definitely shows an increasing leniency by the HSE and by the government to allow this form of treatment in the future.
It'll be interesting to see as well, especially in that case. So like it's important to note as well that the HSE haven't bought the drug.
No,
they've refunded the money that the family have spent on the drug. So it'll be interesting to see whether future instances, if that's going to be the same practice, if they're going to refund it or if they're going to directly buy it.
Yeah, and it's something I believe they're looking at. They're looking at whether it would be a better situation whether to provide it in the first place, where they know its sources and they can essentially fund it from the ground up, or whether it is something that you will have to go and buy and source yourself.
And then gamble on the possibility of a refund.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, but it's an interesting one to see where it'll go in future.
Yeah.
Related things.
Definitely. Again, no solution from us.
No.
I feel like this.
We don't offer solutions. No.
Again, the whole issue of this is just a great discussion, and maybe there's somebody out there that is a lot more knowledgeable than us. And I think that's something that I really was trying to highlight to people when I was trying to sell them our show, was that we're not going to pretend to have a definitive answer or to provide an answer in general for things, and that might be a little bit frustrating for everybody listening. But what we want is somebody listening to turn around, even behind our backs, and go, isn't what they said crazy? Wouldn't this be a better idea? Or even come and say it to our face and say, look, you're talking absolute wallop there. Like, please just realize that this is the reality, or please, this is so much like the
I
whole
suppose
idea.
it'll help people articulate their own opinions and their own solutions for things as well.
Definitely.
I mean, we could sit here and we could tell people, well, this is how you solve homelessness, this is how the HSE should fund alternative forms of medicine, this is how you solve the Israeli-Palestine conflict. We can't give those answers.
Completely, and we're not, no offense to you, but I'm definitely not smart enough to solve these things. I'm a very big believer, as I said in the last show, of the collective mind, and that is the whole idea of it, that there is always going to be a new generation coming up, and it's important that every generation is having these discussions on how best to address these things, because they're not easy to solve situations, the things we talk about, and some of them are a little bit more lighthearted than others, but it is important that people are talking about them so that we can come to a compromise in society.
I think that was a good episode.
Yeah, nice.
We kept it under an hour. We kept it under 15 minutes
so far.
It's not going to remain under 15 minutes, but it'll be under an hour.
Yeah, which is good, but I think that was a lot of the feedback people wanted. And again, last week's episode, it was a double whammy. It was very much, it was an
intentional double episode. That's what we're called. That's
Completely
the part
intentional.
When we go back
to when we go back to edit in future, when we're 10 videos down the line, people will look back at the first one and we'll say double episode. And this will be episode 3.
Double special, yeah.
Yeah, this is actually episode 3 now, and everything will be thrown off. Anyway.
Any plans for the week?
Keep on top of the news, I guess. No, like working away, keeping busy. But yeah, what about you?
Same as. I'm actually... I'm in Killarney next weekend. So we'll have to try and figure out when we...
There you go, we could do a Skype cast.
No, we're not doing that. That's not happening. So listen, I certainly enjoyed the show today.
Yeah, me too. Do you want to round up what we've covered
today?
So
today we look in episode 2 of A Pint of Politics and a pack of bacon fries. We looked at what brought 10,000 people to march on Ireland's capital on Saturday. We looked at how the horse meat scandal has brought
come back from the dead.
Has come back from the dead, yeah. And our 2 stories from Lost in the Storm was Ireland's obsession with Palestinian solidarity and have the HSE accepted that medical cannabis can be used to treat epilepsy.
Thanks for listening. It's
Thanks
been
for
a
listening.
pleasure as always.